In the 1960s, Pontiac was known as General Motors' muscle car division. But as the 1960s ended and the 1970s arrived, Pontiac knew that it needed to find a new formula to attract buyers. Put simply, Pontiac's division management knew that performance days were limited, largely because of impending emission standards as well as the need for increased fuel economy. As a result, the 1973 Grand Am was introduced, and originally this 73 Grand Am was supposed to be a successor to the GTO and even carry the GTO nameplate for more years beyond the 1973 model year. However, Pontiac management knew that they had to create a vehicle with a little bit more luxury than sport as the 1970s rolled on because, frankly, they knew that their engines weren't going to be able to perform as well as they used to in light of the impending emission standards. And thus, the Grand Am was born. Similar to the technique that Pontiac employed for the Granville, which was a mix of the Grand Prix name coupled with the Bonneville name, Pontiac really executed the same playbook for the Grand Am, and Grand Am was a mix of Grand Prix as well as Trans Am. Now, as I said, the Grand Am was really a combination of sport and luxury. By this time, Pontiac was taking notice that there were many different European makes that were offering sportier vehicles that were well appointed. And remember, by and large, sports cars at this point were relatively stripped down models in terms of creature comforts. Of course, in some of them, you could obviously get things like air conditioning and power equipment, but it was a relative rarity, and Pontiac was trying to change that with the Grand Am so that it would endow these vehicles with all the creature comforts that one really could ever have. When it was introduced in 1973, the Grand Am was offered in two different body styles, the two-door coupe, which you see here, as well as a four-door sedan. It sounds blasphemous to have a sporty vehicle as a four-door sedan, but again, the way that Pontiac thought about it, similar to how Olds thought about its Cutlass, was that Mercedes was offering sporty four-door vehicles, so why couldn't Pontiac and or Oldsmobile? As a result, as I mentioned, the Grand Am was in two different body styles. The coupe rode atop 112-inch wheelbase, whereas the sedan rode atop 116-inch wheelbase. Both were based off of the A-body platform, like the Olds Cutlass, this intermediate-sized body that was new for the 1973 model year, and had a number of changes versus the previous A-bodies. Most notably that while they still had frameless door glass, there was no pillarless four-door vehicle anymore. It was just a four-door pillared sedan. And the two doors had this so-called colonnade roof styling, meaning that there was a pretty pronounced B-pillar area. And the reason for this was that General Motors thought that there were going to be impending rollover standards that would be introduced that would basically preclude hardtops into the future. This is one of the reasons why the 1976 Eldorado was deemed the so-called last convertibles, because General Motors thought that it wasn't going to be able to produce convertibles anymore with the impending rollover standards. In any event, the Grand Am was introduced, as I said, in 1973, and by 1975 you have this handsome specimen of the Grand Am, which still kept quite a few of the 1973 features, but some that were different. That 1973 model, as an example, had a 6-port grille. This is a 12-port grille. The 12 ports were introduced in 1974, and they were carried over into 1975 with a little bit different theme. And the Grand Am obviously had this Endura front bumper on it. Now, the Endura bumper was pioneered by Pontiac and dated back to the 1968 GTO. And these were really some of the first cars to get rid of that big chrome bumper look and instead employ the Endura front end to really help with crash resistance. You can see that this Grand Am does have a front bumper, but the 68 GTO really had the bumper incorporated into the nose. And like it or not, those were the first vehicles that were akin to what we have today with modern fascias and a lack of bumpers. Now, 1975 would also prove to be the last year for this first generation Grand Am, and the nameplate was sunset all the way until the 1978 model year, when it would be revived yet again. And for 1975, some of the performance really was lacking. This particular Grand Am that you see here is equipped with the optional 455 cubic inch engine, which only made, sadly, in 1975 just 200 horsepower. It was pretty choked down with emissions. You got a standard 400 cubic inch V8 in the Grand Am. And I believe that Pontiac was the only division in 1975 as well as 1976 where the Quadrajet carburetor actually had part of the secondaries blocked off, largely for emissions reasons, and that further choked down the power on these. But still, well, you got 200 horsepower, and you had some pretty considerable torque, somewhere around 380 pound-feet of torque, so not bad in that regard. Now, one of the things I have to say I love about this Grand Am and the Pontiac Colonnade cars is this double torpedo theme, where you've kind of got almost a four-fender theme. The front fenders, then you see a very prominent rear fender form here. And if you look at the car from the side view, it looks like two different torpedoes. It's just a great overall look. You can see the car seemingly has a big trunk with that large trunk opening, but I will tell you that these Grand Ams actually don't have that large of a trunk, nor do the other A-bodies. It's only about 14 cubic feet, which is pretty small. I would say even a modern-day Chevrolet Impala, as an example, or Toyota Camry would have a 16-ish cubic foot trunk. So despite the fact that these cars are still relatively large, they have, let's say, their large proportions in areas that aren't always that useful, like the hood, and then the length of the trunk is pretty extreme, but the depth of it is not that great. As we take a quick look at the window sticker here, you can see the optional 455 cubic inch V8 was $112. The most expensive option that this particular vehicle has is air conditioning, that was $450. You got to multiply by about 8 to make that equivalent for today's dollars. So the 455 was about $800, a little over $800. Air conditioning, though, was like a $3,500 option. Super expensive on these vehicles, but also very, very comfortable when you ordered it. Now, as we look inside here, you'll notice the Grand Am has a similar wraparound dash as the Grand Prix. It does have a headlamp dimmer on the steering column there. This was one of the first vehicles to have the headlamp dimmer located there, and that would also be something that was featured on the Oldsmobile Cutlass Salon. Notice the center console lid here. This is real wood veneer, but the instrument panel is not by 1975. It was only real wood veneer in 1973, before Pontiac experienced some quality problems with the instrument panel and made that fake wood, but that center console lid remained real wood. It's hard to make out in this photo, but above the HVAC controls is a little label that says radial tuned suspension, which was standard on all Grand Ams and actually endowed them with a pretty great balance of a sporty, luxurious ride, if that makes any sense. It was a great balance between ride and handling. Olds had something similar, but I will say these Grand Ams just almost have perfection in terms of ride. Of course, when you ordered the Grand Am, you got the sporty bucket seats that were also pretty comfortable. This one's missing the seatbelt guide on the driver's side. Those were pretty fragile and broke. You can see here where it's missing. Again, those were just plastic and broke pretty easily. It's one way you can tell a true low-mileage car from one that's not. But in any case, this particular 1975 Grand Am is just an absolutely beautiful specimen, especially finished in that silver color with the blue interior. And while I do find this car particularly handsome, I guess many buyers maybe didn't or just didn't opt for it. Here you can see that double torpedo theme really well, by the way. There's only 8,800 buyers bought coupes and about 1,800 bought sedans in the 1975 model year, and that's likely the reason why the Grand Am model was sunset until 1978 when it would be revived. Overall, from the 1973 model year through 1975, the first generation Grand Am sold about 70,000-ish coupes as well as sedans. Not really that great of a showing over the course of 3 model years. But despite the somewhat poor showing in the sales department, it's hard to argue that this 75 Grand Am is anything but a beautiful vehicle. I love the arrowhead front there that is capped off by that 12-slot Endura grille. And the hood scoops, they look a little cheesy, but I guess they go along with the theme of the car. But I do especially love that double torpedo body side and the prominent fender look the car has. Not so prominent in the front here, but certainly the rear forms I think are especially well sculpted and beautiful. So if you can find one of these Grand Ams of this vintage, they're great vehicles overall. I will say that you want to try to get one where the Endura nose has been replaced, because replacing that nose is expensive. You have to buy the replacement parts and you have to have it painted, and they don't fit overly right. So just bear that in mind if you find one of these that has a cracked nose, that you're going to be spending a fair amount of time and money fixing it. Other than that, super reliable vehicle. Not as fast as the previous Pontiacs, but just a fun car and a great looker. Hope you enjoyed this discussion of the 1975 Pontiac Grand Am. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.